If you really want to bounce a budget, if the $36 trillion debt bothers you, you got to deal with Social Security and Medicare rather than President Trump saying, absolutely not. Not just we need to do it carefully. It says absolutely not. It's madness. It's
Well, first of
madness.
all, Mark, you have made the point on this program several times that Donald Trump has no intention of being the person to touch
Correct.
that rail and get, even though he's not up for reelection. So you've made that point several
Yes.
times.
Yes,
What
sir.
I will say is, going to Ms. Slotkin's point, Donald Trump understands that at this point, we have not made the argument as a country.
Yeah.
So even trying to do something, look at what we're doing. This USAID ID thing is a complete scam, and people are crying in the streets. With all due respect, Mark, all this work, if we're spending $2 trillion more than we currently have, what kind of business, what kind of organization, forget a business, would look at that and say, we've got to have some program reduction. And with the programs, there has to be a workforce reduction. And yet, if you watch the news, you would think, well, I can't understand why they're reducing force. For God's sake, we're spending $2 trillion more than we're making.
Anthony,
But Anthony,
I'm
are you good with cutting taxes then by 6 trillion?
Dan, if you want Mark's 5%, you have got to generate economic growth. I do not see tax cuts as a cost. I made that money, Dan. Miss Slotkin, I made that money. I don't want your government benefit. I want to be able to keep the money I'm making. If you take my take home from 0.58 up to 0.65 or 0.75, Dan, I'll show you some economic growth.
I want Beverly to comment on this,
Sure.
but I also want to say for the record that Anthony makes Arthur Laffer look like a squad member. He's a supply. Go ahead, Aunt Beverly, please.
Anthony, I am based in Greenville, so it's good to talk to a fellow South Carolinian. So thank you so much for your comments. And I just want to echo the fact that Republicans have been terrible about spending taxpayer money. So there's no way around it. I think Democrats have been worse, but that doesn't mean that you're in a good lane just by saying we're not as bad as the other side when it comes to that. Where I see this going is, because I do agree, unless you deal with entitlements, there is no way we get ourselves out of the major debt that we have. You have to touch it. Republicans in the past have tried. You think, of course, of Paul Ryan. It always falls flat on its face when that happens. Here would be my strategy is, first of all, when it comes to Medicaid, find the fraud and abuse and doge it. Because there are people on the rolls that shouldn't be on the rolls. So first of all, make sure...
The work requirement that the gentleman tried to put in there, that if you are a working adult with no children and not a disability, the fact that the Republicans, not the Democrats, the Republicans could not pass that within that budget mess they did the other day shows that we've got work to do. We have not made the argument.
There's a lot of work to do, and I think it's a lot about how you sell it. You need to sell it by saying the people who need it most are the ones who are getting pushed out and not getting the services they fully need. So you do that. When it comes to Medicare itself, not everybody who is a senior wants to be on Medicare. We can do it for those who truly need it. For Social Security, you focus on changing it for those who are younger, those who paid into it, keep it for them, change it for future generations, but it's about selling it. I understand what you're saying, Mark. I'm not completely convinced that Trump won't change.
No, I agree. I've said he doesn't want to be the sucker, but I've said I think he'll try to do it because he wants to be a great president. He wants to go down in history. But here's the other thing I'd say, and this is why I'm not going to go back saying I don't think he'll get it done. You can only do Social Security or Medicare reform in a bipartisan way. No one thinks you can do it. And at this point, I don't think Donald Trump's going to have a bipartisan accomplishment this whole term. I think it's done. Even if there were a national security crisis, I think he's so alienated the Democrats and they're so TDS. I just don't think it's going to happen. So even if he wanted to, it would take an extraordinary effort of building trust and a bipartisan legislative strategy and going to the grassroots on each side. And I just don't see Donald Trump.
I think it comes down to midterms. What happens in midterms?
Yeah, if Democrats take control, but they're not going to take the Senate. So. No.
I mean, look, even within the Republican Party, the last 2 weeks, the whole conversation on Medicaid has been somewhat comical for Democrats because the way they got the Freedom Caucus on board was they said, we'll find $850 billion. Trump then started saying, like, no, don't worry, we're actually not going to touch it. Like, he'd come out and publicly say, we're not going to touch it. Then he'd say, we're just going to get waste, fraud, and abuse. Then he told them, like, no, we're actually not. Speaker Johnson today was telling people we're not going to touch Medicaid. Like, even within the Republican conference, they are terrified when this gets into the public. So they're not going to do it.